Once upon a time, in a bustling city filled with lights that never seemed to fade, there lived a young man named Armin, a hard-working architect whose days were consumed by blueprints, deadlines, and the silent loneliness of an empty apartment. He was admired by colleagues for his brilliance but pitied by friends for his solitude, for though he had wealth, respect, and ambition, his heart had long been searching for something that none of those things could provide. One rainy evening, after a long day at work, he missed his usual train and ended up waiting at a quieter station, where fate had something unexpected in store. Sitting alone on the cold bench was a young woman named Aisha, her hair damp from the drizzle, her eyes filled with unshed tears, clutching a small suitcase as if it carried the weight of her world. Armin, though normally reserved, felt something stir in him, an instinct to protect, to ask, to care. He approached her gently, offering his jacket, and asked if she was all right. At first she resisted, saying she was fine, but her trembling hands betrayed her words. Slowly, conversation bloomed between them, and he discovered she had run away from a suffocating household where she was treated as nothing more than a burden. Aisha spoke softly, her voice fragile yet carrying a quiet strength, and as she shared her story, Armin found himself listening more intently than he had ever listened to anyone in his life. The rain poured heavier, the station emptied, and still they sat together, two strangers finding warmth in the company of each other. When the night grew colder, Armin, seeing her exhaustion, offered to take her somewhere safe instead of leaving her alone in the dark. Though hesitant, something in his steady gaze made her trust him, and she agreed. At his apartment, he offered her food and a place to rest, keeping his distance with the utmost respect. She watched him prepare tea, his movements careful, almost nervous, and for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. As midnight deepened, she grew weary, her head heavy, until finally, unable to fight sleep any longer, she drifted off, right there on the couch, her head gently falling onto his shoulder. Armin froze, his heart racing, every nerve alive, but instead of moving away, he adjusted slightly so she could rest more comfortably. For hours he sat there, barely blinking, afraid to disturb her peace, watching the rise and fall of her breath, realizing how extraordinary it felt to have someone so close, so fragile, and yet so strangely familiar, as if he had known her all along. The quiet of the night wrapped around them, and in that silence, Armin felt something shift within him, like destiny had finally knocked at his door. When dawn painted the sky with golden hues, Aisha stirred, her lashes fluttering open, and for a brief moment, confusion clouded her gaze until she looked up at him. Their eyes met, and without thinking, she whispered one word that stunned him into stillness: husband. It slipped out instinctively, softly, as if her heart had spoken before her mind could catch up. Armin's breath caught, his world tilting as 1,000 emotions collided within him: shock, warmth, disbelief, and an overwhelming pull toward this woman who, in less than a night, had become something far more than a stranger. She gasped when she realized what she had said, her cheeks flushing crimson, but the word hung between them, heavy with possibility. In that moment, Armin didn't laugh, didn't question, he simply looked at her with a depth that made her chest tighten. And though the world outside continued as always, inside that small apartment, something new had begun, something neither of them could explain, but both were powerless to resist. Armin sat frozen in silence, the word husband echoing in his chest long after it left Aisha's lips, and though she quickly turned away, embarrassed and flustered, he couldn't shake the strange warmth it stirred inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years of his carefully built but lonely life. He offered her breakfast quietly, not daring to tease or push, but when she looked up, her eyes glistened with a mix of apology and something she herself couldn't define, and he understood that this fragile bond between them was something neither should rush. Days turned into weeks, and Aisha, who had nowhere else to go, found herself staying in his apartment, helping with small chores, bringing laughter into the space that had long been silent. She was kind, humble, and despite her pain, she radiated resilience, teaching Armin the value of little things, sharing tea at midnight, talking about dreams under the dim kitchen light, and finding joy in simply existing together. Neighbors whispered, colleagues questioned, but Armin cared little, for every day he saw the light return to her eyes, and he realized he was falling, not gradually, but deeply, as if her presence had rewritten the architecture of his very soul. Yet fate, never kind for long, tested them when Aisha's past came knocking at their door. One evening, her elder brother stormed into the apartment, furious, accusing her of dishonor, demanding she return home to the life she had fled. Armin stood protectively in front of her, his voice calm but firm, declaring that she was not alone anymore, that she had the right to choose her own path. The confrontation ended in threats, promises of revenge, and a storm of emotions that left Aisha trembling, but when she looked at Armin, she saw not fear but certainty, and in that certainty, she found courage. That night, unable to hold back tears, she confessed to him the depth of her suffering, the years of being treated as property rather than family, and how for the first time, in his home, she felt human, valued, safe. Armin listened silently, his hands tightening into fists at the injustice, then gently wiped her tears and told her that no one could erase the worth she carried. It was then, through the quiet of her sobs and the strength of his words, that Aisha realized what her heart already knew: this man was not just her protector, he was her destiny. Slowly, tenderly, she placed her hand over his, whispering that when she had called him husband that morning, it had not been a mistake, it had been her soul speaking truth. The confession left him stunned, but instead of hesitation, he smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit his face, and with a steady voice he asked if she would allow him the honor of making that word a reality. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded, and in that tiny apartment, without witnesses or ceremonies, their hearts silently promised forever. But life is not a fairy tale without obstacles. As their love deepened, her family tried again to drag her back, society raised questions, and even Armin's career faced risks because of his decision to stand by a woman deemed undesirable by others. Yet through every trial, they held on to each other, proving that love is not about perfection but about the courage to choose one another despite the storms. Finally, after months of struggle, Armin took her to the courthouse, where in the simplest of vows, with nothing more than their hands intertwined and their eyes locked, they became husband and wife, not by accident, not by slip of the tongue, but by choice. That night, as they returned home, exhausted but radiant, Aisha once again fell asleep in his arms, this time not as a stranger or a runaway, but as his bride, and when morning came, she woke with the same word on her lips, but now it carried no hesitation, no fear, only joy. "Husband," she whispered again, and this time, Armin answered softly, "Wife." And as the sunlight poured through the curtains, their story, born of chance and struggle, became a testament to every heart that longs for a love that defies circumstances and rewrites destiny.